The evening light was fading fast over Granite Lake, the water smooth as glass under the Arizona sky. Dylan Mercer guided his old blue pickup truck along the dusty road that wound beside the lake, his fingers drumming lightly on the steering wheel to the faint tune of a classic rock song from the radio. In the back seat, his 7-year-old daughter Ava slept soundly, her head leaning against the window, clutching her favorite teddy bear, whose fur was worn thin from years of hugs. It had been 2 years since Leah, his wife, had lost her battle with ovarian cancer. Since then, Dylan's life had become a careful rhythm of work and fatherhood. He worked as a freelance carpenter during the day, picking up odd jobs at construction sites around Flagstaff. Afternoons were for Ava, picking her up from school, making dinner, reading stories, and trying to keep their small rented cabin feeling like a home. There was no room for surprises anymore. Everything was planned, calculated, safe. He wasn't intending to linger at the lake. He just wanted to check on the small wooden boat he kept moored at the quiet dock before heading back to the cabin nestled at the edge of the pine forest. The boat was a small project he'd started with Leah before she got sick, a reminder of better times. But as he approached the western shore where the path dipped steeper and the rocks were more jagged, something stopped him cold. A scream cut through the quiet evening air. It was a woman's voice, hoarse and desperate, coming from the less traveled part of the shore. "Please, is anyone there?" Dylan slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded slightly on the dirt. Ava stirred in the back seat. "Dad, stay in the truck," he said quickly, his eyes already scanning the water. "Lock the doors from the inside. Don't open for anyone but me." She blinked, still half asleep, but nodded. Dylan grabbed his denim jacket from the passenger seat and jumped out his boots, crunching on the gravel. The scream came again, closer, this time breaking with panic. "They stole my clothes. Please help me." He ran along the rocky path, dodging exposed roots and low brush. When he pushed through the last clump of reeds, he saw her. A woman stood waist-deep in the shallow water near the edge of the lake. Her long, dark hair was soaked and plastered to her shoulders and back. She had her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her body turned slightly away in a mix of shame and terror. There was nothing on the shore but a single woman's flip-flop lying upside down and a hair tie. No clothes, no bag, nothing. Dylan immediately averted his eyes. His first instinct wasn't curiosity, it was caution. "Is anyone else here?" he called out sharply. "The ones who took your stuff. They're gone," she answered, her voice trembling. 3 guys. I left my bag and clothes on the shore and went in for just a few minutes. When I turned around, everything was gone." Dylan tossed his jacket toward her, close enough for her to reach without startling her. "Catch." She grabbed it like a lifeline and turned her back, wrapping it around herself as fast as she could. When she stepped onto the shore, her foot slipped on a wet rock. Dylan reacted without thinking, steadying her elbow for a second before pulling back to give her space. "Easy," he said quietly. "Are you hurt?" "No, just cold. And—" she looked down, her face going pale. "My phone wallet keys. Everything was in my bag." Dylan scanned the shore once more. It was empty. The insects were starting to chirp in the grass, mixing with the soft lap of water against the rocks. "Where's your car?" "North parking lot." "Can you walk?" She nodded, but her legs wobbled as soon as she took a step. The cold and the shock were clearly hitting her hard. Dylan knew she wouldn't make it far like this. "Listen," he said, his voice firmer now. "My daughter is in the truck. I'll get you to the truck first, then we'll figure out the rest. I'm not leaving you here." The woman looked at him for a long moment. There was hesitation, wariness, and a deeper layer of fear that went beyond just the theft. "My name is Nora Vale," she said softly, as if giving her name was the final test before trusting anyone. Dylan Mercer, he replied. Let's go. As he helped Nora make her way back along the rocky path toward the truck, Dylan had no idea he had just stepped into trouble far bigger than a few stolen clothes. And he certainly didn't know that the woman's desperate cry by the lake at dusk was about to unravel the tightly ordered life he had built for himself and Ava. Nora climbed into the passenger seat carefully, still clutching the denim jacket around her like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. Dylan slid behind the wheel and started the engine, glancing once in the rearview mirror to make sure Ava was okay. The little girl's eyes were wide open now, curiosity winning over sleep. "Who is she, Dad?" Ava whispered from the back seat. "Just someone who needs help. Kiddo?" Dylan said quietly, keeping his voice steady. He reversed the truck and turned toward the north parking lot, the tires crunching over gravel. Nora sat rigid beside him, her wet hair dripping onto the seat, leaving dark spots on the old upholstery. She smelled faintly of lake water and fear. When they reached the lot, her silver sedan sat alone under a flickering security light. The driver's door was ajar. Dylan parked beside it and killed the engine. "Stay here," he told both of them, then stepped out. He circled the car once. The glove box hung open, papers scattered across the floor mats. A single torn envelope lay crumpled under the passenger seat. Nora got out anyway, still barefoot, the jacket trailing behind her like a cape. She bent down and picked up the envelope with shaking fingers. "It's empty," she said, her voice cracking. "The original contract, it was in here." Dylan watched her face drain of color. What kind of contract? Nora hesitated, glancing back at the truck where Ava was pretending not to listen. "I'm suing my brother-in-law, Brett Harmon. After my sister died last year, I found out he forged signatures to transfer family land into his name. This was the only original paper that proved it. Everything else is digital, but the court needs the physical copy for the hearing tomorrow morning." She pressed the torn envelope to her chest like it could still save her. Dylan's jaw tightened. He had seen enough shady dealings in his old security days to know this wasn't a random theft. "They didn't just want your wallet," he said. "They wanted that paper." Nora nodded, eyes glistening. "I think they followed me here. Brett's been trying to scare me off for weeks." From the truck, Ava leaned forward. "Dad hates bullies. He says they're just scared people who act big." Despite everything, a small, tired smile tugged at Nora's lips. She looked at Ava through the open window. "Your dad sounds pretty smart." "He is," Ava said matter-of-factly. "But he burns the toast sometimes." Dylan rubbed the back of his neck, fighting a reluctant grin. The kid had a way of cutting through tension like nothing else. He checked the sedan again. No phone, no keys, no shoes. The parking lot was empty except for the wind rustling through the pines. "You can't drive this," he said. "And you're not staying here alone. My cabin's 10 minutes up the road. I've got a laptop. You can email the scanned copies to your lawyer and make new plans from there." Nora stared at him, weighing the offer. Her arms were still wrapped tight around herself. "I don't even know you." "Dylan Mercer," he repeated. "Freelance carpenter, single dad. Not a serial killer." He nodded toward Ava. "And she's my best reference." Ava waved from the back seat. Nora exhaled a shaky laugh. "Okay, thank you. Really." She climbed back into the truck. Dylan made sure she was settled before pulling out onto the narrow forest road. The sun had fully set now, and the headlights carved tunnels through the dark trees. Ava started talking almost immediately, filling the silence the way only a 7-year-old could. "Do you like pancakes Miss Nora Dad makes them on Sundays? Sometimes they're round, sometimes they're blobs." but they taste good if you put syrup on them. Nora turned slightly in her seat. I love pancakes, especially the blob kind. Ava beamed. Me too. And I have a teddy bear named Mr. Snuggles. He's very old, like almost as old as Dad. Dylan kept his eyes on the road, but something in his chest loosened a fraction. It had been a long time since another adult voice had filled the truck on the way home. Leah used to sing along to the radio. Now, it was just him and Ava, and the quiet that sometimes felt too heavy. Nora's shoulders relaxed inch by inch as Ava chattered on about school, about the stray cat that visited their cabin, about how she wanted a puppy, but Dad said maybe next year. By the time the cabin's porch light came into view, Nora was answering with real sentences instead of one-word replies. Dylan parked and cut the engine. The small wooden cabin sat nestled among the pines, its windows glowing warm against the night. He helped Nora out still barefoot and led her up the steps. Inside, the place smelled of pine and yesterday's coffee. One bedroom, a pull-out sofa in the living room, and a kitchen that doubled as a dining area. You take the bedroom tonight, he said, already heading to the closet for spare clothes. I'll sleep on the couch with Ava. Nora shook her head. I've already taken enough. You haven't taken anything, Dylan replied, handing her an old flannel shirt and a pair of gray sweatpants. Bathroom's through there. Get warm. I'll fire up the laptop. While Nora changed, Ava dragged out her crayons and started drawing at the kitchen table like it was any other evening. Dylan opened his battered laptop, the one he used for invoices and nothing else, and connected it to the spotty Wi-Fi. When Nora emerged, sleeves rolled up, pants cuffed, she looked smaller somehow, but steadier. She sat down and logged into her work email with trembling fingers. It took a few tries, but finally the scanned copies appeared on screen. She forwarded them to 3 different addresses: her lawyer, a backup cloud drive, and at Dylan's quiet suggestion, his own email too. Safe now, he asked. Safer, she said, closing the laptop. She looked at him across the table. Why are you doing all this? Most people would have driven past. Dylan leaned back against the counter, arms crossed. Because I know what it feels like when the world takes everything at once. And because my daughter is watching. I want her to see that sometimes you stop. Nora's eyes softened. For the first time that evening, the fear in them gave way to something warmer. Outside, the wind picked up through the pines, but inside the little cabin, the air felt just a little less heavy. Dylan didn't know it yet, but the woman he had pulled from the lake wasn't just a stranger in trouble. She was the beginning of everything he thought he had already lost. The cabin door creaked softly as Dylan pushed it open, the familiar scent of pine and old wood welcoming them inside. Nora stepped in behind him, still wrapped in his oversized denim jacket, her bare feet quiet on the rough floorboards. Ava bounded ahead, already pulling out her box of crayons and a sketch pad, like this was just another normal night. Bedroom's yours, Dylan said, nodding toward the small room at the end of the short hall. He disappeared into the closet and came back with a faded blue flannel shirt and a pair of gray sweatpants still in their original plastic bag. These should work for tonight. Bathroom's right there. Nora took the clothes with a grateful nod. Thank you. Again. She slipped into the bathroom and closed the door. Dylan could hear the faucet running as he powered up the old laptop on the kitchen table. The screen flickered to life with its usual slow hum. Ava was already sprawled on the floor, drawing what looked like a very serious cat with purple ears. When Nora came out a few minutes later, the flannel hung loose on her frame. Sleeves rolled twice at the wrists. The sweatpants were cuffed at the ankles. Her damp hair was pulled back with one of Ava's spare hair ties. She looked exhausted, but no longer on the verge of breaking. Sit, Dylan said, pulling out a chair. Wi-Fi's spotty, but it should hold long enough. Nora sat and typed in her work email credentials from memory. Her fingers moved slowly at first, then faster as the scanned contract attachments loaded. Dylan stood behind her, arms crossed, watching the progress bar crawl across the screen. She forwarded the files to her lawyer to a personal cloud account, and without being asked, to Dylan's own email address as well. Done, she breathed when the last confirmation popped up. She closed the laptop lid and leaned back. At least the evidence is safe now. Ava looked up from her drawing. You can stay and have dinner with us. Dad makes really good pasta. Well, mostly. Dylan chuckled, despite himself. Pasta it is. He moved to the small kitchen, filled a pot with water, and started boiling it. Nora offered to help, but he shook his head. You've had enough tonight. Just sit. They ate at the wooden table simple macaroni with jarred sauce and a sprinkle of cheese. Ava chattered between bites about school, about the stray gray cat that sometimes slept on their porch, about how Mr. Snuggles the teddy bear needed a new scarf for winter. Nora listened, answering with small smiles, her voice growing warmer with every exchange. Dylan watched them quietly, the tightness in his chest easing just a fraction. It had been so long since another adult had sat at this table. After dinner, while Ava colored, Nora opened up more. Brett Harmon isn't the kind of man who throws punches, she said, staring at her empty plate. He pushes until you break. After my sister died, he forged her signature on land transfer papers. That lake house and the 10 acres around it were supposed to stay in the family. He's already got buyers lined up. If I don't get the original contract into court tomorrow, it's gone forever. Dylan listened, nodding. I used to work security for a logistics company. Not the uniform kind. The kind where you deal with people who think rules don't apply to them. Guys like Brett don't stop because you ask nicely. They stop when there's proof they can't ignore. Nora studied him. You sound like you've seen it before. More times than I care to remember. He didn't elaborate. Some memories were better left in the past. Ava's head eventually drooped over her drawing. Dylan gently lifted her, carried her to the bedroom, and tucked her in beside Mr. Snuggles. When he returned to the living room, Nora was standing at the big window, arms wrapped around herself, staring out at the dark pines. You okay? He asked softly, stopping a few feet away. She didn't turn right away. I keep thinking, if you hadn't stopped at the lake tonight, I'd still be standing there in the water. Cold. Alone. With nothing. Dylan leaned against the door frame, but I did stop. Nora finally faced him. The cabin's single lamp cast soft shadows across her face. Why do you do it? Help strangers like this. Most people would have kept driving. He considered the question. The answer coming easier than expected. Because you looked like you were about to fall apart, but you were still trying to stand. I know that feeling. I've lived in it for 2 years, since my wife passed. And because Ava's watching, I want her to grow up knowing that sometimes you stop. The words hung between them. Nora's eyes softened, something shifting behind them. Gratitude, maybe more. The wind whispered through the trees outside, but inside the little cabin the air felt warmer, alive in a way Dylan hadn't felt in a very long time. He didn't know how long they stood there just looking at each other. He only knew that for the first time in years the thought of tomorrow didn't feel quite so heavy. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a quiet voice warned him that whatever came next with Brett Harmon this night had already changed everything. Dylan woke before dawn the next morning, the habit from years of early construction jobs still hardwired into him. He slipped off the pull-out sofa without waking. Ava pulled on his boots and stepped onto the porch. The pine air was sharp and cold, the sky just beginning to lighten above the trees. He walked his usual perimeter check locks on the windows, the generator humming quietly, the woodpile stacked neat against the side wall. That was when he saw them. Fresh tire tracks cut deep into the soft dirt at the end of the driveway. Wide, aggressive treads, definitely an SUV. They hadn't been there when they arrived last night. Someone had driven right up to the edge of the property, idled for a while, then backed out. No footprints leading to the door. Just watching. Dylan's jaw tightened. He crouched, ran his fingers along the edge of the track. The dirt was still damp from the night air. Recent. Too recent. He went back inside. Nora was already in the tiny kitchen pouring coffee from the pot he'd set on a timer. She looked more rested, hair tied back low sleeves of his flannel rolled neatly at the wrists. She handed him a mug without asking. "Morning?" she said quietly. "I hope you don't mind." "I saw the machine." He took the coffee but didn't drink. Someone was here last night. Her hand froze halfway to her own mug. Brett, or one of his guys. SUV tracks. They stopped at the end of the drive and sat there. Didn't come closer. Nora set her coffee down hard enough that a drop spilled. "The lawyer called while you were outside. The scanned files are solid, but the court needs the notarized hard copy submitted by noon today, or the hearing gets pushed back a month. We have to go into town." Dylan glanced toward the bedroom where Ava was still asleep. "We'll all go. No one stays here alone." 20 minutes later, they were in the truck again. Ava in the back with her tablet and headphones still in her pajamas under a hoodie. Nora sat rigid in the passenger seat, fingers twisting the hem of the flannel. Dylan kept one eye on the rearview mirror as they wound down the forest road toward Flagstaff. Halfway to town, he spotted it. A black SUV with tinted windows lingered 2 cars back, matching their speed exactly. When Dylan slowed at a stop sign, the SUV slowed too. When he accelerated, it did the same. "Behind us," he said under his breath. "Black SUV. Don't turn around." Nora's breath caught. She kept her eyes forward. "What do? We keep moving like nothing's wrong." They reached the notary's office on the quiet main street just before 10. Dylan parked directly in front, engine running. "Stay with Ava. I'll walk you in." He scanned the street while Nora and Ava climbed out. A man in a dark baseball cap stood by the ATM across the road pretending to check his phone. He hadn't been there a second ago. Dylan locked eyes with him. The man looked away too quickly. Inside the small office, everything moved fast. Nora signed the documents, the notary stamped them, and the lawyer's assistant scanned and emailed the final set while they waited. Dylan stood by the window the whole time, arms crossed, watching the street. The man in the cap had moved closer now, leaning against a lamp post. When they stepped outside again, the SUV was parked half a block away. The man in the cap started walking toward them. Dylan moved first. He placed a hand lightly on Nora's back, guiding her and Ava toward the truck. As the man drew near, Dylan turned and stared straight at him. No words, just a look that said everything. The man stopped mid-step, then veered off into a coffee shop like he'd changed his mind. They drove straight to the police station next. Dylan insisted. The desk sergeant took the report, stolen items at the lake, the torn contract, the suspicious vehicle last night, the tail this morning. He printed a case number and promised to send a patrol past the cabin later. It wasn't much, but it was official. On the drive back, the black SUV was gone. Dylan still checked the mirrors every 30 seconds. Ava had fallen asleep again and the back headphones slipped sideways. The silence in the truck felt heavier now. At the cabin, Dylan didn't relax. He installed the cheap security camera he'd bought months ago, but never set up, ran a new deadbolt on the back door, and placed a baseball bat within easy reach by the porch steps. Nora watched him from the kitchen window, arms folded. You don't have to do all this, she said when he finally came inside. I do. He wiped his hands on a rag. For Ava. For you. For this house. Nora stepped closer until only a foot separated them. The afternoon light slanted through the window, catching the worry lines around her eyes and something softer underneath. Dylan, she said, voice low, you've known me less than 24 hours, and you're already turning your life upside down. Why? He looked down at her, the same answer from last night rising again. Because you stood in that lake shaking but still called for help. Because I've spent 2 years teaching myself not to need anyone. And last night you made me remember what it feels like when someone does. He swallowed. And because I don't want you to leave when this is over. Nora's breath trembled. She lifted one hand and rested it lightly against his chest, right over his heart. The touch was warm through his shirt. For a second, neither of them moved. The space between them shrank until he could see the faint freckles across her nose, until her lips parted, like she might say something more. Then, Ava's voice rang out from the porch. Dad. The gray cat came back. He's eating the tuna I left. The moment broke. Nora pulled back with a soft, surprised laugh. Dylan smiled too, the tension easing just enough. But as Ava ran inside, chattering about the cat, he caught Nora's eye again. The look she gave him said the same thing he was thinking. This wasn't over, and neither of them wanted it to be. The second evening after Nora had walked into their lives, the sun had just dipped behind the pines when headlights swept across the cabin windows. Dylan was tucking Ava into bed when the black SUV pulled up right at the front gate engine, rumbling like a warning. He stepped onto the porch, heart steady. Nora stood just behind him in the doorway, her hand brushing the back of his shirt. Brett Harmon climbed out slowly, dressed like he owned the world white shirt, open at the collar, expensive watch catching the porch light. He held up a thick envelope, smiling the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. Nora, he called, voice carrying across the yard. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Dylan moved forward one step, placing himself squarely between Brett and the woman behind him. You're on private property. Leave. Brett's gaze flicked to Dylan, amused. The hero from the lake. Cute. Nora, this is your last chance. Sign the transfer papers. I'll make the legal mess disappear. No more threats, no more surprises. He tossed the envelope onto the porch steps. It landed with a soft thud. Inside is proof your sister owed me more than you think. Walk away now and everyone wins. Nora's voice cut through the night, sharp and clear. There is no debt. There's only your forgery, and I'm not walking away. Brett's smile thinned. Your sister's gone. She can't protect you anymore. Neither can he. He jerked his chin at Dylan. Think about it. Midnight tomorrow the offer dies. He turned, climbed back into the SUV, and reversed out without another word. The taillights disappeared down the dirt road. Dylan waited until the sound faded completely before bending to pick up the envelope. Inside were doctored bank statements and a handwritten note trying to cast doubt on Nora's sister. He scanned every page on the laptop, attached them to a new email with a short statement about the threat, and sent copies to the lawyer and the police sergeant from earlier. Done, he said quietly, closing the laptop. Nora stepped close. Her eyes shining with tears, she refused to let fall. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to. Dylan looked down at her. Just stay. She rose on her toes and kissed him, then soft at first, then deeper, like she had been holding her breath for 2 full days. His arms came around her, and for the first time in years, the cabin didn't feel empty. The next morning, the lawyer called before 8. The new evidence, combined with the notarized contract, had forced the court to issue an emergency restraining order. Brett was being summoned. The land transfer was frozen indefinitely. Nora listened on speakerphone, hand tight in Dylan's, and when she hung up, she was laughing through happy tears. Ava wandered out, rubbing her eyes, Mr. Snuggles dangling from one hand. Is Miss Nora staying now? Nora knelt and brushed the little girl's hair back. If your dad says yes, I'd really like to. Dylan smiled, the real kind that reached his eyes. He says yes. Weeks later, the gray cat still visited the porch. Ava's Sunday pancakes became a 3-person tradition, and the cabin that once held only quiet grief now held laughter, late-night talks, and the sound of 2 hearts learning to beat together again. Dylan would sometimes stand at the same window where Nora had stood that first night and remember the desperate cry across the water. He had only meant to check on an old boat. Instead, he had found the woman who reminded him that stopping for someone else wasn't the end of his ordered life, it was the beginning of a better one. And sometimes the things stolen from you aren't clothes or contracts at all. Sometimes they're the pieces of yourself you thought you'd never get back until the right person calls for help in the dark and you decide to answer.